What is the funniest answer to a test when the student clearly didn't know the answer? I graded AP exams this summer. For one essay question, I got an awesome barbecue sauce recipe from a kid in Tennessee. I've made that a couple of times, and it's excellent. I was marking a final year engineering test. I'm a teacher's assistant, not a lecturer. And instead of answering the last question, some guy drew an incredibly detailed portrait of himself serving fries at McDonald's with the caption, "Me, if I fail this test." I still had to fail him, but I did feel bad about it. Some say he's serving fries to this day. It wasn't for a test, but a large portion of the class didn't do an assignment, so the teacher decided to assign a makeup assignment. He wasn't planning on assigning anything, so he asked the class for ideas. Someone said, "An essay about procrastination," and he said, "I like that idea," and the conversation ended with that. Next class rolls around and someone turns in an essay titled, "The Importance of Effective Communication," because he never actually assigned the essay. It was a pass or fail class, so the essay was pretty much a completion grade. The teacher accepted it and gave him a warning that if he tried that in any other class, he might have gotten a 0. I was helping a teacher grade back in high school, and I was grading a kid's geometry quiz. The question was a 2-column proof, and it asked to prove that one side was congruent to another based off 2 triangles being congruent. Had to prove that the 2 triangles were congruent first. This was his whole answer. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle BCD because they kinda look the same. Side AB equals side DB because they're both 3 eraser lengths long. College-level physics exam asked for a brief description of Maxwell's theory. The instructor shamed a student by reading aloud his answer. Good to the last drop. Just another student. We had a test which involved life skills. The question was, what are 2 causes of infertility in males? His response was, lack of a wang. He tried to argue that he wasn't wrong and somehow got a mark. I don't know if the teacher survived that debate with a straight face, but I know for a fact that I wouldn't have been able to. Sorry, students, this is what happens when you go for the low-hanging fruit. No pun intended. My friend needed to name Alger Hiss on his government exam. He forgot the dude's name, so he put, "I am not a spy." Back in college, if I vaguely knew the word I needed to answer, like Alger Hiss, I'd write out the A very clearly and then scribble next to it so it looked like I knew the answer and just had crappy handwriting. It worked extremely well. As a teacher's assistant in my high school grading chemistry tests, for one question, which read, "Convert 1 meter into millimeters," one student had converted meters to yards to feet to inches to centimeters to millimeters, rather than just multiply by 1,000. My high school teacher would always encourage us to write funny answers down if we didn't know anything. She found marking tests extremely boring, so if we could make her laugh, we'd at least get 0.5 of a mark on it. The student actually knew the answer, he just didn't know how to spell it. I taught history and showed a video clip of Ronald Reagan's famous, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." In a later quiz, I asked students to write down this quote, with my favorite response starting, "Mr. Gooberchuck." I had one ESL student who couldn't quite get the hang of changing singular nouns into plurals. "I have a pen" got him full marks on the unit test. "I have 2 pen" and added an IS at the end of the word pen didn't get him full marks. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Double Sausage Dude just has really crappy grammar. It wasn't an answer, it was a proposition. Saw a post on Reddit where someone drew a picture and got credit for it for a test answer. So I did the same thing on my next science test. Teach told me that my drawing of a giraffe was garbage and gave me nothing. I was a student teaching first grade and was quizzing a student on sight words. The word was horse, and he said, "Horse, horse, horse." I'm a teacher that hasn't got any super funny answers yet, but when I was a student, my philosophy class did a group thing about a test. Our professor had told us that at the start of the quarter, that when we did the final, if every single person turned in the test that's blank except for a name, we'd all get an A. Apparently, he made this offer to every class for years. Well, of the 20 or so of us in the class, only one person was going to pass. We all thought the teacher was a jerk. So when it came time for the final, he passed out the test and left to go to his office. After he was gone, we all talked about it, and those of us who had bad grades said, "We have nothing to lose by turning in a blank paper. We're failing anyway." And then we looked at the one guy who was passing. He said, "I'm a philosophy major, so I just want to find out if he means it or not. Let's do it." So we all wrote down our names on our individual tests. Then we lined up and went to his office and one by one handed him our blank tests. He was shocked. We were the first class to pull it off. He made us promise not to tell anyone, and he did give us all 100% on the final. I clearly didn't keep my promise about not talking about it. One time, a kid in my Latin class started sneezing out various denominations of bills when turning in his test. The total added up to $75. I think he dropped the class. When my wife and I were TAs in grad school, we proctored and then graded an essay exam. We had a student write, "I don't know, so here's a picture of a puppy," and he then drew a beautiful picture of a puppy. It took him nearly an hour to complete it. To this day, when I ask my wife a question and she doesn't know the answer, she just says, "puppy." Well, I'm not a grader, but I've got one. An old teacher of mine used to grade AP stats tests, and he said a student once drew an elaborate Rube Goldberg chain reaction kind of thing across 2 pages for a short answer. Not me, but a classmate of mine. In my 8th grade social studies class, the teacher offhandedly mentioned, "Necessity is the mother of invention." On the test, one question was, "Blank is the mother of blank." My classmate wrote, "Mary is the mother of Jesus," and we were all really upset that he didn't get the credit. 8th grade free response question, explain how the United States acquired the Louisiana Purchase. My answer? The United States purchased Louisiana. I received full credit. Well, to be fair to you, it was a stupidly worded question. What else were you going to say? Napoleon was like, "Oh my god, we need those dollar bills." And then Jefferson was like, "But seriously, it's not in the Constitution that I can buy stuff like that." And then Jefferson's cabinet was like, "Stop being a jerk and buy it." And then Jefferson was like, "K." I mean, your teacher just wrote the worst question ever. I had a friend who put "Obama is a lizard" as an answer to all of the AP Gov-free response questions. The narrator feels like, given what he's learned about certain parts of the US, you might be able to get a partial credit on that answer depending on which deep red state you did that in. Got to teach a technical theatre class and gave a quiz at the beginning to see what the kids knew. One of the questions was, "Name a good conductor." I was looking for metal conductor like copper or brass, ended up with several answers like Leopold Stokowski, Leonard Bernstein, and several famous composers. We all had a good laugh when we went over the answers. A bit different, not quite a test. Class was reading a play in English literature during junior year. We were rotating parts between students through the various acts, point being that we did actually have parts, so people weren't necessarily focusing on the story as much as they were on when it was going to be their turn to speak. Some girl's line comes up and her character is mentally handicapped. The line read, "Make horse sounds," with horse being spelt HOARSE, as in raspy throat. The student started to neigh. I don't know about credit, but we all had a good laugh. On a sample essay I read for AP World History, they were listing evidence for a question related to American Indians. One kid wiped his blood on the exam sheet and wrote, "This is a blood sacrifice to the sun god of the Incas." Sadly, he didn't get the credit. I took a philosophy class in high school. For the final paper, we had the option to write an essay arguing to the teacher that we were not a figment of his imagination. I decided to do the opposite. I wrote a whole essay about how I was a figment of my teacher's imagination, and I ended up with a B in the course. That was the only assignment I handed in for the entire course. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was in a biology class, and the very first test I was clueless. At this point in time, I didn't quite know the teacher or his style or anything about him, really. So naturally, clueless on the essay question, I decided to go meta and write a speech about how I was bombing the test. I compared it to Harry Truman deciding to nuke Japan, and how that was thought to have saved lives. By my own nuking of the test, who knows, maybe I could do the same. I got a call from my mum later on. He didn't like it. In fact, he decided to interpret it as a bomb threat. Needless to say, that was a rough semester afterwards. I was one of the last classes to take a hotly contested statewide standardized exam. In its dying days, some big muckety-muck decided it would be a great idea to add a science portion to the exam. Their mistake was telling my class that we were the first class to take it, and therefore were simply testing if it was useful for the school board, and our results on that section would have no bearing on our final test results. The question was something like, Susie and John have a heavy box. They need to put the heavy box on a shelf, but it's too heavy. They have several pieces of wood, a saw, a pulley, etc., etc. Design a system for moving a box to the shelf and explain why this works in scientific terms. My response? Susie and John could do many things. They could build a lever, as you're obviously suggesting they do with the boards, but the box would likely slide back down the lever and kill Susie and John. Here is a drawing of Susie and John dead under a box. They could build a pulley, but I don't want to explain how that works, and also, if they're too small to reach the shelf with the box, how the frick are they going to attach a pulley to the roof? Drawing of Susie and John looking sad as their parents yell at them for screwing around with the garage ceiling. My recommendation is that Susie and John open the fricking box and move everything individually like normal human beings. Picture of Susie and John high-fiving and saying, "Gee, Willy Walkers, we did it!" Since the test was unscored, I never found out how they liked my solution, but I do hope I gave some old ladies a few conniption fits. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not exactly an answer to the prompt, but at my high school, thanks to a friend, we now have the AP Stats Challenge. Get 5 on the test while writing the entire free response portion in haikus, and only haikus. So I think 5 to 10 people have pulled it off, and it definitely made the test a lot more entertaining for me. Not a teacher, but in AP Physics 2 on a practice test, so naturally I didn't care as much. When asked to solve for the mass defect, I explained how mass effect drives work in great detail, as well as different uses. I think my teacher liked it because he wrote, "This is my favorite store on the Citadel," instead of marking it wrong. Not a grader, but on the AP exam for world history, a friend of mine, rather than actually write an essay on one of the assigned topics, described the plot of Mulan. That's my second favorite story involving her. Purposefully easy extra credit question asked, "Who's your favorite founding father and why is it Alexander Hamilton?" I responded with Aaron Burr, and drew a short stick figure montage of their famous duel. I knew the answer, but decided to be flippant regardless. I still got full points. Once on an endocrinology exam I was sitting, the last question required everyone to reference 5 RCTs published in a journal in APA format. No one had been told that anything like this would be on their exam, and obviously no one was going to remember all the authors of a study off the top of their heads. So being my frustrated self, I referenced How to Be an Absolute B-Word by lecturer's name. 2 weeks later, I got called into her office and was made to apologize and told to not do this again. I love the sass on display here. Also, is the teacher's ego so fragile that they wanted to officially reprimand a student for writing an answer in a private setting that only the grader would see? I get that it's disrespectful, but honestly, who is so butthurt by that they go to the hassle of arranging a formal disciplining session? I am the student in this case. I'm taking AP Calculus and it's absolutely kicking my butt. When I didn't know an answer, I wrote a prayer to the god of math. O Lord of math, grant me thy favor, that I may understand this thy holy work, for I am yet powerless before your tests, and weak in my calculations. Amen. I got a half credit. On my AP Calc test last year, there was one question that I had no idea what the frick they were even asking. After staring at it for about 10 minutes, I gave up and drew a portrait of the proctor surrounded by velociraptors and climbing up a rope from a helicopter. I like to think I got at least partial credit for that. I was taking a film history and appreciation class at college and came across this question. What is camera obscura? My answer was, the type of camera a hipster uses. I got no points, but my professor said he got a good laugh out of it. Biochemistry exam. There was a complicated synthesis question. How would you produce X? And the student answered, with blood magic. The answer was written in his blood. I asked about it later. The student had gotten a paper cut when taking the test, apparently. Test included reading a map of Rome and finding your way around using coordinates. Question: How can you get to the Colosseum from the starting point? Plot out a route on the grid provided. My answer? I don't need the grid because I've played Assassin's Creed Brotherhood enough to know where I'm going. Question. Who was Genghis Khan? Answer. The host of The Price is Right from about 300 AD to 350 AD. Back in the 3rd grade, I had a 2-part written question on a science test. Part 1. If you had to change the gas nitrogen to a liquid, how would you do it? My answer, I would change it to a liquid. Part 2. Explain what would happen. My answer, it would change to a liquid. Funny thing is, I actually got full credit. My teacher wrote something like, I can't say that this is what I was looking for, but I can't say that it's wrong either. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, I had an essay exam about a book I hadn't read. Instead of answering the question, I wrote an essay about why I didn't read the book and talked about another book I'd read instead. My teacher ended up liking it and gave me a good grade, even though I hadn't read the book he assigned. I guess he liked that I put effort into writing an essay about a book I'd actually read instead of trying to bullcrap him. Question. What is x? Answer. It's certainly not y. Question. State the differential and integral form of Hooke's law. Answer. The differential and integral form of Hooke's law. I got a full credit on each of these masterpieces. I had to read Heart of Darkness in high school. I literally couldn't get more than 3 pages into it. We had to write an essay in class about it, so I pretty much wrote, there's a man on a boat, and he's recounting a tale that took place in Africa. I make it 3 pages in and realize that I haven't actually comprehended more than the first paragraph, so I start over. There's a man on a boat, and just repeated that for a page. Then we had to read our essays aloud, and luckily we were in the AP class, so the teacher let us get away with crap. Also, had to do the same thing with All the King's Men, and I wrote about the repulsive writing style. There's a car on a road, and it's driving down the road, and it's about to go off the road. And there's an N-word in the field by the road. But the N-word doesn't see the car, and the car doesn't see him, and it's about to go off the road. But they don't see each other. This is a terrible book. The narrator hasn't read All the King's Men and is not sure that this succinct summary will be enough to sway them over to doing so. Let him know in the comments if it's worth picking up. On a quiz in Bio 2, it asked what group a certain organism was in. I didn't know, so I put Blue Man Group. My TA apparently liked it because I got the point anyway. When I was in American history in high school, I had a test where one of the questions was asking what the 19th Amendment was. It was the women's right to vote, by the way. My teacher was male, and I was just screwing around and thought I'd try to make him laugh. So for the answer, I put a mistake. Ended up getting 100% on that test. I got one from both sides of the spectrum. Once in advanced calculus, the final question was something which I had no clue how to answer. So I just wrote in the entire space, 7. It turned out 7 was the correct answer. However, I got no credit for it for not showing any working. And when I was a marker at university, I was going through the tests and a question was accounting. Describe a transaction which causes a decrease in an asset and also equity. A student's answer was, a building caught on fire and got destroyed. Technically, he was correct, although it wasn't really a transaction, more of an event. Question. What are your opinions on doing the deed before marriage? 16 marks. Answer. I wouldn't buy a car before test driving it. How are you even graded on this? It's asking your opinion. Even not answering could be taken as meaning you're indifferent. In 12th grade, me and a buddy of mine, let's call him Tom, were both in the same calculus and vectors class. I already decided to major in history at a university, so my mark in this class didn't mean too much to me. Anyways, during the exam, I got to a question which asked me to graph the derivative of a given function. Not knowing what it was, I simply drew a kitty face on the graph, cause screw it, and moved on. About 10 minutes later, Tom, who was sitting beside me, discreetly got my attention, and I see he's stuck on that same problem, and hoping I'll help him out. Chuckling to myself, I turned to the question on my exam and moved it over slightly. Seeing what I'd done, Tom shook his head, quietly whispered, "Screw it," and did the same thing. Suffice to say, our teacher was less than happy with us after the exam. In high school, I was in biology class with a buddy of mine. The class and the teacher were a complete joke and no one took it seriously. On an exam, the teacher wanted an essay on something, and my buddy didn't feel like writing it. Instead, he drew a picture of Jesus and wrote, "Jesus is always the answer," above it. He received full credit. If my English teacher is on Reddit and sees this, she'll probably use my answer. We had a scarlet letter quiz and had to connect the term antimonian to the novel. I got it in my head that Antimone was a woman in a Greek myth who was punished for adultery like Hester. I was the student. Spelling test. Asked to spell euthanasia. My answer was youth in Asia, the 3 words jammed together. On my English 1 last year, on one essay I wrote the names of 150 NFL football players. I got a 4. University. I dropped Chem 2 lecture, but still had to take the corresponding lab because of drop limits. Didn't get most of the material, but didn't particularly care if I failed because it was only 1 credit anyway. I drew Pokemon for all the answers on the final. I got an A. The professor was a cool guy. On the last day of class, someone brought in a big flan, another girl brought a guitar, we had a mini party, and the professor played the guitar for us. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.